All right, well, thank you for joining. So today we'll be talking about data entry in Arctos. And so today I will just be covering the data entry form and how to also customize the appearance of the form. And another session we'll talk about bulk loading data in spreadsheets. Um, so to get to entering data, you'll use the tools directory and navigate to create records. And this is going to bring you to a landing page. So you have three options essentially when you're starting out. So you can start from your last entered record. So you can see my kind of indicates what my last action was. So if I pull that up, it'll pre-populate all my fields with that information. So that might be useful if you're entering a series of objects or field collections that are coming in with very similar data and you're just needed to auto increment catalog numbers or just tweak little things. Um, you can also select any of your previously entered records that are hanging out in what we call the browse and edit screen. So you can see I have a few records here and I can select from any of those and begin here. And then if you are a manager, you can select from any previously entered record, which again will be from this browse and edit screen. And so you can see I have a student here whose records I can also see. So if you have manager permissions, you might have a bunch of folks that are entering data. And since you're the one reviewing it and ultimately pushing the load button for those to go live, you'll be able to kind of select from or look at any of those records. So, or you can just start from scratch. And so option 2 will list all the collections that you have permissions for. And so if I'm going to enter a bird record, I'll click that button. And one thing that I want to cue you into, so it will automatically pre-populate my GUID prefix. However, you always want to look at the bottom and see what profile you're using. So the profile that it's defaulting to is just going to be whatever you entered most recently. And so I was looking at the photo observation profile that I have. And so you don't want to start loading all your data for a bird record and only to find that you're actually, entering a photo, you're using a different template. So the first thing that you're actually going to want to do if you're not in the correct profile is use this customize button. And this is going to take you to the profiles page. And I'll talk about customizing these in a moment, but you'll go to profiles home. And this is going to list all the profiles that you have set up. And I highly recommend setting up a profile because you're just going to sort of tailor that template to your workflow and to what you need to enter data. So you can see anytime you go to Profiles Home, it's going to list your profiles at the top of this table. So these are kind of the different profiles I've created. But you can actually, because we're in a community environment, you can actually look at other people's profiles and actually clone those if you kind of like what you see or use another collection's profile. Again, it's going to be entering your data, so no worry that you're overwriting anything. But this is useful, like say if you went on a joint expedition or co-collected samples with another institution and you want to just kind of use the same format, it can be handy to kind of glimpse other people's templates. But I'm going to just for the purposes of training, I'm going to go all the way down to the bottom. And I'll just show you what a default profile is. So just so we're just seeing all the fields available. And you'll notice it's very lengthy. And so this is why you probably want to customize it because in all likelihood, you might not need to enter, we're at part number 12. You might not need to enter 12 parts at once or 8 collector agents. But I'll just walk through kind of what all these fields mean, and then I'll show you some of my customized profiles. So at the top of the screen, again, we've selected the collection I'll be entering, so that's already written there. There are 2 absolutely required things needed to create a record. Everything else is optional. So when you see a yellow field, that means that is a required value. So you will need to have an accession in order to create a profile. So let's say if I know my accession, I'm going to just push 543 and push the tab button to call that up, and I can select that accession, or I can actually just do a different type of search. if you've never, if you don't have accessions or are unsure of, or if you have sort of historic collections that might not have an associated accession number, often people set up these sort of dummy accessions under zero, just to kind of group and batch everything into one accession, and maybe you can parse that out later and retroactively assign accession numbers. So there's kind of ways to work around that if you don't use accessions at your institution. There's a spot for catalog number. You'll enter here. Record type. So this isn't required, but if you are sending your data to GBIF, it will be required. This is a Darwin Core term. So you might be selecting something like preserved specimen. Record remark is just a generic text field. Then we get into the identifiers block. And so these are going to be identifiers associated with your record. And so there are a few different types of identifiers. So the first are going to be what we call type A. So these are going to be things we're expecting to have a URL linked. And so these are going to be really actionable. So when you select, a UUID, or even this generic identifier, we're expecting that it's going to have a hyperlink out to Dryad, or to Morphosource or something like that. There's also then type B identifiers. These are kind of local collection codes that people might use. Similar type C are going to be pretty generic identifiers that a lot of collections tend to use, like preparator number, field number, collector number. These aren't going to be actionable, so they're not going to be hyperlinked, but they at least add precision to what that identifier type is. And then type D are kind of things we're trying to resolve right now, so you can kind of ignore those. But essentially, while not required, we highly recommend using an issued by. So for instance, if you're saying, you have a collector number and it's 12345, we highly recommend saying who that collector was. And that's going to give a lot of information, whether, you know, and that's going to link to the agent. So at least it's going to be something that anyone browsing your records can then click on the agent and get a lot more context and information. And we have issued by is just a direct link to the agent's code table. So it's going to have both people and organizations. Another field in this table is identifier relationship. So if you don't pick anything, it will default to self, but this is where you can actually create all these associations with existing catalog records. So for instance, if you're entering a bird and you already have the parasite record entered, I could select host of parasite as my relationship, or collected with, or same matrix as. So this is going to then connect to the records that are already in Arctos. And that's going to create this nice reciprocal relationship that people can really easily navigate between those records. Another tool that you can use in this block is this pull button. And so this is essentially, I'm not going to quite say a clone button, but if there's a record in Arctos that you kind of want to just clone, and pull a lot of the existing information. So for instance, if I'm entering a bird and this is from a collector, we get a lot of material. He just salvages things from his banding station. So I'm going to just click all the things that I want to toggle. So maybe I want to always include the locality, collector, maybe attributes, identifications. And so if I say go, it's going to pull up the record that I'm asking to essentially copy information from, and I'll click use, and then it'll pre-populate that information. So we do get a lot of red-winged blackbirds from this collector. So I can basically cut what I don't need, keep what I want, but it just saves you time in entering records like any clone function does. I'm just going to refresh this page to clear it. The next block is identifications. So this is another field where, again, accession and identification are the only required values that you absolutely need to enter a record. And so this is where you're going to type, the name of the object. And so if I'm doing like a bluebird, I'll just start typing in the name and push tab. And then I can select that I want mountain bluebird. Another button here that's useful is this build button. So maybe you have something a little bit more complicated. So maybe you have maybe uncertainty or a hybrid, or you just want to write a text string. Maybe you have a new species and you just kind of refer to it with a preliminary name. Maybe you have you're a ethnographic collection that's we have non-Linnaean taxonomies. Nomenclature 4.0 is a taxonomy that we use for cultural objects, but maybe you just want to type in the name of the object. You can use that option. So if I click hybrid, essentially, I can then I can type that second name and then I save to form, and it's going to pre-populate that format there for me. Identification order is also something you'll indicate. So essentially, 1 is going to be sort of an accepted identification, whereas 0 will be an unaccepted identification. And then if right now you can enter more than one identification to the record. Generally, I only use 1, but maybe if I have this mountain bluebird and I want to put its junior synonym, a past name here, because that's what's verbatim on the tag. I can put that there and with a 0. But there's non-hierarchical ways. So if you want multiple identifications to show with no hierarchy, you can actually indicate 1 for this ordering. And then essentially, 2 through 10 are just going to be various shades of less accepted than identification number 1. So hopefully that makes sense. Date and agent. So in Arctos, you can always select from the calendar or hand type, but all dates are going to be in that ISO format. So year, month, day. And if that's going to be a date you're using throughout this form, you can say copy across and it will just pre-populate that to a lot of different fields. And if you don't end up using these accompanying fields, it's no bother. It'll just throw these out. And then similar with agent, you can.
You got Emily there?
Yeah, this is the training.
Hey. And then similar for agents, if you type in an agent that made the identification, you can also copy across and that will pre-populate it. So a nice little shortcut. Next are identification attributes. So these are just kind of characteristics about the identification. Some of these have, if you select nature of ID, for instance, it'll have controlled values that you can select from. Next are agents. And so these are going to be roles associated with this object, whether that was the collector, copyright holder, preparator, and you can enter on this big form up to 8. And then we get into the place and time stack. And so what I will say is that although accession and identification are the only 2 required values, once you kind of start entering data into some of these fields, there are dependencies. So for instance, if I'm entering coordinate data and I start to say, I'm using decimal degrees as my coordinate system, then Arctos is going to expect that I am entering a latitude and longitude in some of these dependency fields. So in this place time stack, you will always need to record record event if you're recording any type of locality or event information. So for a lot of my collections, it's either going to be a collection or an observation, but there's all these other types of events. And then record event determiner. So this is kind of, I think, pretty unique to Arctos. So in a lot of cases, if I have a bird specimen, it's going to be the collector and the day that it was collected. However, if I've geo-referenced an old record, a historic record, the record event determiner will actually be me and this current date versus 1901. So that's really kind of closely associated with who's geo-referencing or determining information, interpreting information about the record and the locality event information specifically. So I definitely have to enter, my name and the the determine date, and then there's other types of fields where you can indicate, whether we accept this information, something seems wrong, or verified and locked um, actually indicates that someone, the primary source data information has been verified, typically by a collector, the original collector or the curator, and that's going to really lock this locality from being edited. And you can view, just like anywhere in Arctos, you can easily see these code table definitions by clicking that blue hypertext. So if you ever have a question, click that hypertext, or there's links to the handbook where you can find more information. Collecting source is going to have a few options. One thing to know is that when something is captive, those coordinate, if you are entering coordinate data, it's not going to map. Collecting method, habitat, there's a lot of specific open text remark fields associated with each of these different data blocks to kind of organize remarks so that they're associated with the information you're talking about. So event name and locality name are both options that if you are constantly referencing an event or a locality that maybe you're resampling over time, you can actually give nicknames or, numbers to these types of uh, data that you're reusing again and again, and that way it's a shortcut to pull that information. So I don't have an event name, but I do have a site name that we often use. So Sylvandale is somewhere that we sample quite frequently. So if I type that in and I use this pull sync locality, I'll get a little message, and then it's actually going to pull in this information. So you can see all of the coordinate information is pulled in, the specific locality, higher geography, and that way, that's syncing that up. And so I'm not creating, a slight variant by typing, the locality information in a slightly different order. So that's just going to normalize that data with my existing data. And similar for ID, locality ID. So all Arctos events and localities have identification. So I pulled up a record, essentially that is from Sylvandale. And so if I go to locality, you can always find the ID right here. So that's how you get that ID number. Or if you go to edit locality, it's also going to be up here. So that's where you can grab those numbers if you know that an existing or locality exists or an event exists that you just want to copy information from. I'm just going to reload this to kind of clear the screen. There are event attributes you can select from. So these are going to be temporal information and cruise data, often associated with marine localities. Locality higher geography. So this is a pick list. It's controlled by the Gatum thesaurus. So you can always just type the lowest resolution. So essentially this is going down. If you're in the US, it's going to include country, state, county. So it's going to go down to the third administrative unit, essentially, if you're anywhere else in the world. So if I'm in Boulder County, I can just type Boulder, push tab, and that's going to bring up, there's only one Boulder county. And so I can then pick that and it will pre-populate this controlled text. You've got, oh, sorry, I forgot to say, in event, we have verbatim locality. So of course, this is going to be warts and all, misspellings, historic place names, anything that's verbatim from your label or your ledgers. And then specific locality will be interpreted slightly or cleaned up slightly. And you can use this tool. So if I'm like Northeast Boulder, something like that, I can pull that easily into this field and vice versa. So another shortcut. We've got elevation fields, and we do, if you are entering something, you will have to, even if it's not an elevational range. So obviously I could do 8,200 to 8,600 meters or feet. But if it's just, precise altitude, you can just copy that and put it there twice and then indicate your elevation units. Similar story with depth. Enter locality remarks here. locality attributes. So these are going to be a lot of the chronostratigraphy, lithostratigraphy information associated with paleo and geology collections. It's also going to have the public land system survey coordinate that you can record there. And with any, I'll say with any of these attribute fields, while not required, no longer required, entering who determined it and the date, the method are all very helpful and provide just extra metadata. So we highly recommend using these things so that you're giving a lot more context to anyone reading these records. And it also just provides timestamps too, which can also be useful. Then we get into the spatial data. So this is where you'll select your coordinate system if you have it. You can also use geolocate. So we have a little geolocate application where you can essentially use, it'll pre-populate your locality string and give you an air radius. And you can do a lot of things to adjust this uncertainty or your points. And that's just going to basically save this information to your application. So you can georeference at the time of data entry. You can also do it after the fact, or of course you can enter the coordinate data that came in with your object. And there's multiple, so in this form, since we're looking at every single field possible, it has, every coordinate system available. Whereas in my customized forms, I'm just going to generally have decimal degrees because that's really the only type of coordinate data we receive. And then record attributes. So again, we have lots of attributes, optional options. And right now, because I am entering a bird record, it's actually going to be a filtered list. So this is just filtered for attributes corresponding to typical default bird collection values. If there is an attribute that you've seen it in the code table that you're not seeing here, I'll show you how you can add that in a moment. But again, this is where you'll be adding information, and some of these things, once you queue them up, are going to have, they're going to be controlled in some way. Then we get down to parts. And so parts are also part of a code table. So, if I'm doing a skeleton, I push tab, it's going to pull up anything that's associated. Let's see if I do skin. You'll see there's a couple options, although we have little notes in here on best practices. So we used to have options for study skin, our skin flat, but now we've moved a lot of those into our preservation types into a separate field to enter. So you can essentially filter what you're seeing here, or you can see everything. So this is how you can see what's in the code table. If you're like, oh, I really need to enter baleen plate at this time, there's a way to do that. So I'll show you that at the end. Once you enter a part name, these are dependencies. So part count, you'll always have to enter, as well as the disposition. So whether that's, in collection, on exhibit, transferred, et cetera, et cetera. There's a place to record condition, barcode. So this is going to plug into the containers hierarchy that we have in Arctos. If you have containers set up, this is going to relate to that. And then part remark. We also have part attributes. So these are going to be, characteristics of your parts. And so there's a suite of different fields that you can choose from. I often do use preservation. And so that's going to then give me another control menu where I can refine further and give more information. And yeah, after parts, that's really the end of this menu. So you can see there are a lot of fields. This is pretty busy. So if you actually know the typical fields that you use, you can use a profile instead. So I'm going to instead use, I wasn't even using my bird profile, but I'm going to show you my a profile I've set up for a wildlife rehabber that we work with often. So if I say use, you'll see that now it's setting up a template exactly how I like it. So, fewer options, and I actually have information populated into my fields. So you'll note that I always have preserved specimens selected. I have identifier pre-populated, so Greenwood animals always have an identifier. And then I'm giving little instructions. So these templates are useful not only for myself so I don't forget anything, but also for my volunteers and students. And so, it's saving them time by not having to type things, but it's also giving them a little bit of information if they're maybe new to entering data. So, I've got in brackets anything I want them to enter. So it's just kind of giving them a little reminder. Identification date tends to be the date the bird was found. Um, I have a little information here. So the event determiner is always going to be Greenwood unless you're going to put the georeferencer's name. I have a little note here, found injured and transferred to Greenwood, where euthanized. So kind of a way to just help people along and so that everything's entered consistently across operators. Another big one, at least for us, is we record a lot of measurements when we prepare bird specimens. So just even though these are drop-down menus, the time taken to select, 13 or so values takes a while. So this is a nice time saver. And because I've selected these, it's now showing that these values are in yellow and are required. But again, I have notes. So, ossification, we're only going to record for passerines, stomach contents. A lot of these animals are going to the hospital. Maybe they're there for 2 weeks, and so they're fed. So we're only interested if they're kind of like wild type contents and not, provided food. And so that's one of my customized forms. And, let's say everything is a little bit different. So maybe every once in a while, you're going to get information where, generally we only need one event attribute, but now something is coming in and you actually need to record two. So this is where you can go to customize. So it's going to take me back to the customize menu. So when I'm in my profile, I've got my profile name. I can add a little description if I want. And I'll just walk through how you might customize something. So at the top, these counts and ordering really control the look and appearance of the data entry form. And so the order, so here's all your data blocks, and you can order them however you want. So you noticed my identifiers and identifications were up at the top of my form while my parts were at the bottom. You can totally rearrange the order by using these numbering systems. So if you want to kind of reorganize those to match, how your ledger fields are ordered or how a tag typically displays information so that it just is easier for someone, you can go ahead and do that. And then you can also control how many you see of something. So I was mentioning event attributes. I only have one on this, but let's say something came in and it needs 4 event attributes. I can go ahead and change that and say save and use. So you can always update something. Same thing. So record attributes, I have 17 because we actually use that many, but someone might just want to see 1 or 2. So this is a way to just kind of clean up the form and really cater it to your specific needs. And then below, it's going to control your individual fields. So you can see little instructions here. So anything everything defaults to show unless if you say hide. So show means it's visible on the form. Hide means you're hiding that information. So for instance, we rarely get anything with UTM coordinates. So I just have all those coordinate fields hidden. We don't typically use things like event name. I hide that. And then you can also say carry. So this is going to carry over. So once you save a record, it's going to essentially carry over that information to the next record. So again, if you're entering something, a field collection that basically has all the same information, or just a series that's going to have a lot of similar information, you can toggle everything on to carry so that it's just saving you from having to re-enter the same information over and over. And you can turn those off if, a week later you don't need to carry those values over. And then this is where you can also just enter the default value. So these can be both free text values and controlled values. So word of warning, if you are using a controlled value, for instance, this record type, I have preserved specimen. It does need to exactly match whatever is in the code table. So I can't have preserved space specimen, or else it's not going to show up in my form. But this is where I'm entering sort of all my notes for folks, or just defaults. And you can see I've got, some things are, this is show values and this is hide. So for instance, you can see all these coordinate systems I'm hiding that I don't use. And that's how you kind of clean up what's visible and what's not. And so you can save and use, and that's how that works. So let me just show you profiles home. I have another one for photo observations. So again, it's going to be just look a little bit different. So my record type will be human observation. It's going to be a creator versus a collector. I don't have a lot of attributes typically for photo observations, and my part's always going to be media with a part remark of digital image. So just to show you kind of how these templates work. So if you want to set up a profile, you'll just go to you'll just select the record type that you're entering, and then you can just start pre-populating this form, and you'll give it a name and save it, and then it will be available to you in this menu. So hopefully that makes sense. Next, I want to show you, I have a record that I have created. I have not saved it. So I just want to show you kind of what this looks like. So a lot of times when things are turning green, it means that they are controlled values. So for instance, people names, the identification. And so that's why you're seeing these fields turn green. I have purposefully left some things blank, so you'll see an error when I save. But this is just a green-tailed towhee record that I'm entering. We just prepped it recently. And you can just see how I'm using the form. So this is actually a pretty low data salvage bird. So I've got some notes that this is salvaged northeast of Mesa Verde National Park, but we didn't receive a county. But I'm making sure that this was not a park specimen. We've got all of our attribute data recorded there. And then I've got a study skin and 3 tissues. And so I actually use, we don't have a barcode container hierarchy in place, but I do actually use this part attribute of location. So I'm recording the freezer box. Currently, one day we will create barcodes and get it into the container hierarchy. But this location field is masked, so public viewers aren't able to see this and find our tissues. So, so when I am ready to save, I'm going to go down to this create button or the create record button, and purposefully again I've left out information. So we'll see. I actually filled this out last night, so I don't know if it's going to. Yeah. Okay. I did fill out this last night, so it's probably stale. If I refresh this, let's see. Yeah, okay, I lost it. But you saw it turning pink right there. Let's actually just do I'll do a quick and dirty something. We'll just do, oops. See, this is why I didn't do this in real time. We'll just do a couple selections where I'm purposefully leaving some things right, some things blank. Okay, I'm going to just do a basic event information and show you how it's going to yell at me. Okay, so create record. It's going to first turn this record pink. So that means it's not saving. When it turns it green, that means it has saved. And you are going to find essentially all at this bottom section, you're going to see all the things that are wrong here, okay? So because I entered specific locality data, it's now telling me that there's no record event determined date, there's no higher geography information, my part count is null. I didn't enter higher geography, so it's giving you It's sometimes a little bit hard to understand, but in general, it's telling you the field names that are problematic. So that's where you're going to see all that error. So you can kind of just go back and add in that information and keep hitting create record until it eventually saves. Once it saves, there will appear a hyperlink to the browse and edit screen. But since I that didn't work out, I thought that might not work out because I let that record sit overnight and then I had to re-log in this morning. But it's essentially going to shoot that record into your browse and edit screen. Um, and it's taking a moment to load here, but it's going to be hanging out with any other records that I just recently entered. And so let's say you entered a record and then you're on to your next and you're like, oh shoot, you know what? I should have put this remark in my previous record. You can always go back and find your record. So let's just say I want to go back to this record by hitting this edit key. That's going to take you back to the form. And it's also going to have these really helpful red boxes that just show you exactly where you've entered information. So if you need to like tweak, maybe you entered the date incorrectly or you want to add something, you can go ahead and feel free to do that and then just save your edits here at the bottom. You can also do things from the screen that are also helpful. So this is a nice, essentially flat table, flat table of where you can just browse things and make small edits. Like, let's just say I want to I want to update a catalog number because I did that wrong. I'm not going to do that because I don't want to overwrite my information. But if you do need to make just a tiny little edit, you can just double click on any of these fields and do that here. Another thing you can do is filter. So if I just want to look at, all the records that one of my students just entered and just see those, I can do that. And then another thing you can do, this enter field right here is, so let's say I like this record, and this is going to be something, a series. We got a bunch of material from Greenwood, and it's all going to have really similar information. If I click enter, it's going to seed this information into a new record. And the way we know it's new is it's green. So before, when I was just checking to edit, the background was white. And also the button is going to be create record. So maybe I'm just, auto incrementing my catalog number and just kind of changing a few key pieces of information. That's essentially cloning the record and creating it that way. And then filter. So basically there's all these controls here. And so some useful ones are, this is a really long table, right? So maybe you want to hide all these blank fields that you're not using so you don't have to quite scroll so much. You can click that button. You can show all columns. But there are these controls where maybe you want to download these records so you can just see them more easily in a spreadsheet and manipulate them. Or you want to load the records or delete them. So a lot of times you're filtering this table to do these actions. And so usually you can filter, a few different ways, but let's say you can't quite get the filters, maybe I want a mix of just 3 of these records, and no matter how I filter up here, it's not working. So if you want to just grab 3 specific records, you can just say filter. And when I do that, it populates the key to this record, which is just like a local identifier, and filter for those 2 records. Maybe it's not doing that. I'm not sure. Michelle, do you know why that is? Edit filters
It's
matching.
because you also
Oh, I
select.
have these on.
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. You have to
Thank you.
deselect some of the other ones.
Okay, there we go. So now it's just filtering for these 2 records. And now, if I want to delete those or if I want to load these, I can go ahead, click load, and this is going to, once again, summarize what I'm loading. And then when I push auto load, that is the button that releases those records into live mode and they will be available online. And usually this can take, can take a couple minutes. It can take 10 minutes. It can take an hour. It kind of just depends on what all is happening in the background with other Arctos users. But in general, it's pretty quick, especially if it's a small job. So, but yeah, that's the master button. So a lot of your operators that are like students and volunteers are not going to have that permission. So basically all of these records that they're entering are coming to this staging table where you're going through and verifying everything's correct, and then you're the one ultimately loading those. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. The last thing I just wanted to cover is just how to add more attributes to the attribute window, or to the attribute sort of field, sorry, attribute selections here. So yeah, so again, when you're entering a record, I'm within my UCM bird collection right now. So I'm only seeing kind of a filtered view. So let's say I just want, there are a few more values I want. The way to add those is actually if I go to my tool directory and go to manage collection, and I'm going to manage my bird collection. You can just pop down to collection defaults or scroll down, but it's going to be under authorities. So let's just say, and you can choose multiple different authorities, but I'm interested in adding some attributes. So if I go to collection attributes, collection settings, this is going to show me what's available to me and what's recommended. So you can see I don't have a few of the recommendations, and that's because in use, it's also showing me what's in use currently. And that's because we're always adding more values to these tables, right? So I probably came into Arctos when only some of these values were available, and now there's new options. So I can just toggle on anything that I want to add. And that's a nice way to, especially if you're managing like a teaching collection, you just have a little bit of this and that across disciplines. This is a way to just kind of toggle everything that you might need that represents different types of collections. So once I toggle those things that I want in, and if I say update, it's going to actually populate that menu. Sometimes it takes a few minutes, so don't expect like real-time update, but it generally is within the hour kind of thing. So yeah, I think that's all I have. Sorry, that was lengthy, but let me know if you have questions or additions.
Thank you. That was great. That was a very thorough review. I was just I was just typing in the comments that if you click on any of those column headers, it'll sort the columns for you. So you can cluster all the available ones, click on it again, and it'll put the available ones at the bottom.
Yep.
And if you want to just find it alphabetically, then click on that first column. Or if you want to see all the ones that you selected, then you can click on the select column. So I use that all the time because
Yeah, that's a great tip.
yeah. Thanks. Back to data entry. I have a general question, or not a question, but maybe a suggestion to help me understand all the different ways that we can actually clone information from one record to the other. Because I think you actually highlighted at least two different ways.
Mm-hmm.
One, you can actually clone the values from a specific record, but you can also clone information from one record to another through the customized template. And I think there was actually a third way.
Yeah, so there's three different ways. So the first is essentially pulling information from a record that's already live in
Mm-hmm.
Arctos. And so that could be, that could be really any of your records. So that's going to be accessed through this pull button under identifiers. So that's where you're going to call up that Darwin core triplet and essentially find any record in the database, and then also kind of toggle on and off the things that you want.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's going to find the existing record, and which you can also preview if you want to just open that in another tab to be confirm, yeah, I want to pull in all this stuff. And you can use that. So that will pre-populate it. So that's one way. So those are existing records. The other way is through browse and edit. And so these are for if you want to clone things that are kind of hanging out in this staging table.
Right. Okay.
And so those kind of like generally things you've been working on really recently. And so that you're going to use this enter button, and that's going to pre-populate it this way. And then the third is actually when you first come into data entry, create records. If you want to start from your last entered record, that's essentially pulling in all the information from the record that you entered last. So the last two options are essentially kind of more immediate clones, whereas the first option, this pull button, is going to be you have the world as your oyster, and you can even pull information from another collection. So if they have the parasite and you have the host, or they have the tissues and you took the voucher, you can do it that way too. So it's just a nice way to really have consistency between like records.
Great, thank you.
Mhm. Other questions or tips or things you do differently that are
Yeah.
handy?
Any questions?
No, this is great. I look forward to rewatching it. Emily, this is fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Cool, we can end the thing. Yeah, I just I always go into really a lot of detail, but I feel like